Hands up, whoever has an opinion about hit points in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first version. Oh goody. Well, I have had and have no beef whatsoever with the concept of hit points as abstractions. The prose in the DM guide is quite coherent as far as I'm concerned, that they do not represent actual damage necessarily, and that can be handled on a case by case basis per hit or per moment of play of just how wounded one may be, whether it's not at all, as in the verbal example, or partly, or that was a terrible hit and you are spurting blood everywhere, or whatever it may be. The concept is perfectly coherent and works fine in play. Now, taking away the idea of that whole concept is a good concept or a bad concept, I'm perfectly happy with completely clinical wound damage too in some other game. So it's not really a question of whether it's a good system or a bad system or concept. What we can do is recognize a difficulty in the rules, in how that kind of damage assessment relates to another aspect of the rules, which is the deeply clinical details of how the damage gets delivered. Now, even in the context of the 1 minute combat round, which is a little generalized. So, yes, we're going to stay in that context, and that's fine that it's not a single blow we're necessarily talking about. But even in that context, we have a very clinical outlook. We've got the nature of the weapon in every possible detail, its length and its weight and its sharpness and its mass, and the whole sense of how it's used with speed factors relative to other things and its relationship to the armor that one is wearing. Of the target, and many other aspects are extraordinarily clearly set up. One could easily be forgiven for thinking that once employed, the quantitative aspect of what happens to its target would be equally clinical. So I completely get this sense of lurching disconnect when suddenly being told that the 17 points that one has managed somehow to deliver, few if any of the weapons are capable of that, um, but that the 17 points that you have just delivered to a target do not actually represent 17 points of equally clinical bodily harm, as would be indicated by looking at all the rules that one has dealt with up until this point, including one's own body with strength bonuses and things. All those things are so representational that suddenly to be told that once it crosses from you, the attacker, to them, the defender, that all of a sudden we just sort of, okay, we're done with all representation at that microsecond. That is definitely a lurch, a jarring, disconnected sense of wait, what are we even doing in this game? And that's where I would put the rightful critique of the damage system, and not in a more abstract sense of whether handling hit points in that way as itself is a good or a bad thing or whatever. As itself, it's fine. Let's think too in terms of amounts. I don't know if you have heard as many complaints as I have of the sense of, well, I got hit by 10 arrows and I was fine. How realistic is that? That's silly. Well, putting aside for the moment that it would have been perfectly sound for you to say that none of those arrows actually drew any blood at all, because that is explicitly the case and a sound way to play. Putting that aside, let's think about these purported dozens and dozens of hit points, this huge damage soaking sponge that people seem to talk about a lot. And people out there, right? I can make up people out there saying things I don't like for days, but right now I am talking about both textual and verbal complaints that I have experienced multiple times. Well, let's see here. 10th level, ninth level fighter, right? That's when you become a lord, after all, and get bannies of all sorts. And for most of the other classes, that's when your class title of that level actually matches the actual class name. So a ninth level assassin is an assassin, a ninth level cleric is a cleric. Well, anyway, so let's take a look at our lord, our ninth level fighter, and let's go ahead and say they are reasonably robust and therefore have a +1 per level due to their constitution. And why not? I mean, I'd prefer to play a fighter with such a thing. So would you. So here I have my 9d10. I roll them. And let's see, breaking them up by multiples of sums of 10 to make life easy. That's 30. And so 30, and then I've got a little multiple here of 15 more. So I get 45 rolled. We're going to get the +9 for the Constitution bonus, and we have 54 hit points, which is, a meaty chunk, make no mistake. But can it really take 20 arrows? No. If 20 arrows hit you, you are, I don't care. Except for extremely edge case on those D6s for the arrows, you are riddled with arrows well past your negative and you're dead as mutton. So let's recognize that even our lordly fighter is not going to be trotting about with that much damage soaking, not to that extent. And if 20 arrows does sound excessive, I mean, who gets hit by 20 arrows after all? Well, then again, there are creatures who do, significant and nasty damage on using especially multiple hits. And given that the monster's roll to hit is better than yours, and they are certainly comparable to you in terms of things like armor class, and they've probably got dreadful, monsters at that level are going to have dreadful effects on failed saves or even successful saves. But whatever. You save against the dragon breath, you're still taking half damage. Then dragon's buddies are hitting you with their triple attacks and whatever. Your 40 to 50 hit points there aren't 40, 50 something hit points are not necessarily the big damage soak that everyone seems to think they are. Oh, there are a couple of other interesting nuances. Well, we've got our, say, ninth level thief, just to give you an idea. I've got my 96 right here, and I roll, and I've got here, let's see, there's a 10, 15, let's see, 20, 26, and I'm not going to say that our thief has his constitution bonus. He had his tossed his points in a few other places, and so 26 points. Ninth level. Can the dice be dice and give us some high values? I mean, well above the mean or the median value for that roll? And the answer is certainly. That can happen. Dice are dice and will be dice. But even a pretty hefty roll for hit points, cumulatively speaking, across all these levels, isn't really going to be, given the foes and given the dangers and stuff like that, it really isn't going to be this incredible, I took 5 axe hits and, then a dragon breathed on me and I was fine. I don't see it. I think it's a fine meme that has persisted to be able to complain about it, but it muddles the actual functionality of play of what hit points are actually doing relative to the damage coming in. That's one variable. And then there's the other variable of what are even the hit points, representationally speaking, which is to say whatever we want at that moment, which is the rule. And then the disconnect, though, with all that mental effort toward the clinical nature of what's coming in and then having to suddenly be jarred with what it is once it lands. I think that's where the discomfort comes from that leads people to be so cranky.